Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process, far deeper than the usual. Do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple. And I've always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, Cecilia Castleman. I get a lot of music sent my way. I must get 50 plus emails a day, at least from publicists, pitching artists, sending me music, things like that. I try to listen to most of it. I don't listen to all of it. I mean, if I know that I'm not going to like that type of music, I just don't have the time to listen to everything, but I'll try to give most things a shot. And I know within the first few seconds whether I like it or not. So I opened up the email from Cecilia's publicist, and her debut album, self-titled debut album, is out January 24th on Glassnote Records. And heard the opening guitar riff of It's All Right, first track on the album, and I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere for 48 minutes or however many minutes it is. This album is good. It is really, really good. I try not to be hyperbolic, and I don't want to say this is the best thing I've ever heard, because you wouldn't believe me, but it's the best thing I've heard in a long time. The songwriting, the melody, the beat, the lyrics, everything. So good. She's in her early 20s, which is just incredible to think about, because I think her songwriting is just, it's so fantastic. I know I sound like I'm gushing here, but this is really front to back. By the way, that's the vinyl reference, I guess, isn't it? Front to back. First track to the last. Everything is good. So please give this a listen after you listen to the podcast again. Cecilia Castleman, debut album, out January 24th. Everything about this. Oh, produced by the legendary producer Don Was. I cannot forget that. But this is really one of the best albums I've heard in a while. So if you have not heard her before, you're going to hear it here first. Mark my words. This thing is going to be around. I got a good feeling about this. I love it. Anyway, enough gushing. I loved this conversation because I love to hear things I've never heard before from songwriters after doing 400 of these interviews or so. Home Depot is a place where she gets inspired. Now, you're probably thinking, how is that possible? So if you ever see Cecilia Castleman at the Home Depot and she's in the paint section, she's not looking at paint. She's looking for song ideas. She finds inspiration in the names of the paint, which if you've ever been to a paint aisle, it makes sense. The paint names are, I don't know where people come up with these names, but they're not just blue, green. They are these long titles or names of paint that you think, who comes up with that? So it makes total sense. She gets inspired by the paint aisle at Home Depot. She also told me baking cakes is inspiring. So is looking at old houses. But I love that idea. And I think the theme here really, if you can hear it, is that the antenna, they're always up. She's always looking around, always hypersensitive to what's around her. And if you can get ideas at Home Depot, you can get ideas anywhere. So that was a big theme of this, just how aware she is of her environment. But if you listen to the songs, which I hope you do, I think it makes sense. So I loved this conversation again. Cecilia Castleman, self-titled debut produced by Don Was, is out January 24th, and it is so good. So please, after you listen to this, go buy the album uh, and listen to it. Let me know what you think. Anyway, here's my episode with Cecilia Castleman. The first thing I always ask is, do you feel it's important to create in some fashion every day, whether it's good or bad? Or do you feel like forcing it can make things sound too stale or too derivative?
Sure. Um, I I do create every day for sure. If I'm not thinking about, like, if I'm not writing, I'm thinking about it. And there's always a song in the back of my head that I'm working on or tweaking. Um, Whether even if I, grab a guitar up or not, or walking down the street, or I'm always thinking about it. So I am creating every day. Whether, and I love photography, I love to paint. So it's not always music, but I definitely do. And I think if I think it might be subconscious, but yeah, I'm always creating every day. And
And
that's
I,
important to me for sure.
and I think as a writer, or when I was a professor, I tell my students the writing process is always taking place. Like if you're going to be a writer, you have to understand writing doesn't just take place when you're putting pen to paper. It happens when you're walking, when you're thinking about it. And I think that takes the pressure off the actual creation of it. If you know that the process is happening, even like if you are walking down the street, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Or driving. I love to drive around and listen to songs, and I consume a lot of music, and plus too, like, I'm so young right now. I'm 23, and so everything is so new and exciting to me. And so I'm like in this age where I'm like I have so much, to say, my life is very, nerve-wracking but so fun, and everything's new. And so I always feel the need, like I get home and I'm like, there's so much information that I've just consumed. I need to get it all out. It's like, I feel like a lot of it too is, however much you intake, for me, I have to get it out just as much. So, yeah, I think I'm always, it's kind of, and if I don't write, I get nervous. I get like anxious if I'm not making something.
Do you actually, so we're talking about writing. Do you journal?
I don't journal. Everyone thinks I do voice notes on my phone. I've gotten really into that because I want to go back and hear like the tone of my voice. And so I have a folder of like, hey, I did this today, and or this sucked, or this was great, or but I don't like write it out. I probably should, and everyone says I should, but I'd rather hear it.
Is the painting, is that something that you do to get your mind off of songwriting, or do those things ever? I don't know the answer to this, but some songwriters do tell me that those things intersect, that sometimes when they paint, that gives them song ideas, but other times it's a way to completely divorce themselves from songwriting and to then come back and approach it in a fresh manner.
Sure. I think I love it so much because it's a creative outlet, but it's not. Painting isn't my main thing, and so I don't have to worry about whether it's perfect or not. I can sort of just, paint, and I can lose myself in it, and at the end of the day, if it sucks, then I don't worry about it like I do music. Um, but I do think it helps with writing. I think about this with Joni Mitchell all the time. She was so descriptive in her writing, and I think it's because she was such an incredible painter that she saw things in a different way that people didn't see. And so I do think it helps, um, but, for me, I just love it, and I think I don't worry about it 'cause it isn't, it's sacred to me, but it isn't, as much as music, and I can sort of just live with it and have fun with it.
Do you consume visual art? A lot of songwriters tell me that they get inspired when they go to art galleries. Uh, Sometimes the titles of paintings or the descriptions or just the work itself. So does that kind of visual art ever inspire you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. My mom and I, we go and go to the art museum all the time here in Nashville. And yeah, I love it. I love seeing, what they titled the art or, yeah, for sure. I love art museums or even like we were in a Home Depot the other day and I was looking at all the paint colors and like there was one called Overcast and I was sitting there, and everyone's like, get out of the way. I need like, 4x4s. And I was just writing down paint colors. So it's everywhere for sure. But, yeah, I have a lot of friends who are like that. They love like anything immersive and or like candles, anything that's like very sensory. I'm super into.
So I think I mentioned I've done about 400 of these interviews, and I've never heard Home Depot referenced as part of the songwriting process. So I can't just let that go. And okay, that's on to the next question. So I love that though, only because I've never heard it before. So, and it's so funny you say that because whenever you look at titles of paint, if you go to Home Depot, and that title, the colors of paint, it's never
Mhm.
blue. It's all, and we say, like I say to my wife, how do they come up with these names of these? And I could see that now that those could give you great song ideas or titles, right? So you're telling me you're just looking at all the colors, and that was inspiring.
Yeah, like I have probably have a list of them. Like Overcast was cool. Yeah, it was something. Yeah, I don't know why. I probably look like such a dork looking at all that stuff. But yeah, it was I don't know. I just loved it. I love looking at all the paint colors because it's so endless. Um, yeah, it just gives you ideas.
But doesn't that I love that idea though, and I think as a songwriter or as an artist, that shows you the importance of always being open, uh, having the antenna up all the time, and always being open to the possibility that no matter what it is that you're doing, there could be song ideas in there. I mean, even Home Depot, which is not, I mean, I hear things like people hear lines when they go to restaurants or they ball bars, like they hear someone say something, write something down. That's pretty easy. But to be inspired by the things that you see in such a mundane place, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. My friend Daniel Tashian, he's a great writer. He's very in tune, and I think um yeah, a lot of like some of my favorite writers, you could just tell when you talk to them or you listen to interviews or stuff like that. They were just in tune that a way that I inspire to be just with, normal everyday things. Um I feel like Tom Petty was really good at that. Just capturing like normalcy and just the way people live and you relate to that. And yeah.
So back to the voice memos, because, and this is a question I always ask songwriters because they tell me that they have all these voice memos. And I had an interview with, I think, I forgot who it was recently. They said they had 10,000 voice memos on their phone, but there's no organization at all to those voice memos. So there's no titles or anything. So when all those voice memos, is there any organization to them or is it just, no, there's nothing?
Not with mine. It's always like audio. Like no, never. I'll name them every once in a while, but most of the time, like I'll just be like, oh, I'll remember, whether I do or I don't. Yeah, I'm not a very organized person. I feel like if I would label myself, I'm sort of like a structured creative. Like I love to know what's going on. I love to know what's going on with like my career and I'm very on top of things when it comes to that. But when it comes to everything else, I'm just like I'm looking at my room right now and there's just crap everywhere, but I kind of like it that way. Um if everything's like super tidy, it makes me feel anxious. Um so I'm organized in some ways, but other ways I'm just not at all.
Again, here's another thing I don't hear very often because often songwriters or writers even say that before they start to create, they have to clean the space that they're in because that's a way to kind of feel like I've accomplished something so they can get started. So, but I love the fact you think, do you have to be messy? That's the opposite.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best quality. Like I know where everything is. Um I think too I just love I like having a lot of stuff around and I like little things. And my dad's a writer and he's like this too. There's just crap everywhere, but it sort of helps me cuz then I can look at stuff. If everything was clean and I didn't have anything to look at, then I don't know. It's like I don't know if I could write if I didn't have stuff to look at or pull from or, you know, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so back to that one follow-up to the voice memo. Do you really go back? Because I don't have voice memos. I'm a prose writer, not a songwriter, but I have all these. I'm looking right now. I have all these things I've saved. I never go back to them. So do you really go back to those voice memos?
Yeah, I do. Um, when I think of songs, like I'll be like, I write a lot of stuff, good and bad. But um, if I'm driving in the car and I think like, oh, I've totally forgot about that song, and I'll try to go back and I'll find it. Um, I'm glad I have it all. Uh, yeah, I go back a lot.
Do you go back when you feel like you're in a rut?
Yeah, like if I need ideas or that kind of stuff, yeah, I'll go back and listen.
So I want to ask you about, and I've got the track listing up here. I want to ask you about the first track specifically. It's all right because that guitar riff at the beginning. I don't know how anyone could start listening to that first track and then say, "Oh, okay," like skip to the next track. That riff is the first time I heard it. It was, "Oh, I'm listening to this." I mean, there's no way that I could possibly skip over this. I mean, I don't think, to be clear, I don't think any of the songs are skippable, but to have that be the first thing you hear on the album, it is so amazing. So I'd love to know where that came from.
Yeah, I wrote It's All Right. I went to audio engineering school so I could learn how to make demos at home. And I was over my professor at the time, Mark Rubel, who was just a savant of all things music. He had a studio, and me and my friend were over there recording. And I remember I get inspired a lot by new gear and stuff that a lot of writers, you just get inspired by different guitars you pick up and gear you use. And I remember I plugged an old Gibson SG into a Space Echo piece of outboard gear, and I started playing in a super old amp, and I just remember writing that lick like right off the top, and I was like, "Whoa, this is really cool!" And just because I had never heard it before in that sort of combination, I grew up very acoustic guitar, and the minute I stumbled upon electric, I was like, "Oh, this is like a whole other thing." And yeah, I wrote it, and then I wrote that chorus. Um, the lyrics were different. It used to have different lyrics. And then I remember being so excited. I left the studio and I came right home. And I don't, it's those things where you don't even remember driving home, which is kind of scary, but you're like, how did your mind is just in another place, but you know, you're, where you're going. But, yeah. And then I wrote it the rest that night and then the next day. And I remember being so excited about it because I was like, finally, like something like I can jam to. And I love songs that are personal but yet universal. Like that's what I always try to write. Um, and I think It's All Right really captures that. And yeah, I was so excited when I wrote that song. And these are
So,
cool
so
ones.
the riff came first, and then the
Yeah.
lyrics.
Yeah.
So, when something happens and you have that eureka moment where it's like lightning in a bottle, do you mess with that stuff or afterwards, or is the thought, this was so good and it happened so quickly, it's meant to be, I'm not going to touch it?
So I try not to mess with it too much. And I'm definitely one of the writers in town that doesn't mess with stuff. And if like I don't second guess it. I'm that's one thing I'm pretty good at is I don't second guess stuff a lot. I just kind of go with it, and if it's right, it's right. And if not, maybe I'll write something better the next day.
So, when you write lyrics, are you a pen and paper person or a computer person?
I'm pretty I'm on my notes app on my phone.
I can tell how what your answer was going to be because you sighed first because I think you feel disappointed in yourself that the answer wasn't pen and paper, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm bad about it. Um, but yeah, just on my phone.
But why you say you're bad about it? I mean, why do you feel like it should be something different?
'Cause it's more tangible and you can go back and look at it, and where if it's on your screen, it's not as cool, I guess, but, it's just so much easier to write, and when your mind's going so fast, like, it's just so much easier to type for me than to write it down.
The advantage I hear to writing down, and I feel, I mean, listen, my handwriting's terrible, so I'm not a pen and paper person either. But the advantage to lyrics writing down on pen and paper I hear is that if you don't like something, you can cross it out, but it's still there in case you have to go back to it. But when you erase something on a phone or computer, you can never go back to it.
Yeah, I need to go to back to pen and paper, but I don't know.
It's so funny how these things have come in waves. I feel like we're back to, I'm hearing more people say pen and paper. Um, I think 5 or 6 years ago, it was not that way, but I feel like the retro aspect, or maybe people are realizing the value of it. I mean, I know that when I look at things that I wrote years ago with pen and paper, when I go back to that and I see those words on the page, um, it puts me back in that emotional state because I can almost see how I felt based on the words, and it can be something as the way the letters were formed or the ink or something like that. And that's the advantage to that, is that you feel like that's what I felt like back then, and it's easier for me to be in that state.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's how I feel with voice memos.
So I have a quote up here. I've got some quotes by writers. And actually, let's get to a songwriter quote first, because you mentioned this. And David Byrne of the Talking Heads said, "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other." So, I'd like to think of that in the context of when our brains are engaged in monotonous activities, that's when the unconscious ideas bubble up. So songwriters tell me they get ideas when they are gardening, folding laundry. Agatha Christie said the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. I've heard vacuuming, things like that. So when the ideas don't come to us when sit down and think, I'm going to have an idea, they come to us when we're doing something that requires no thought. So you've already said driving. So does that happen to you often when you get ideas when your brains are engaged in those activities that require no thought?
Yes, for sure. And I think a lot of it I think that applies to also playing guitar. If you're focused on playing guitar, yes, it's creative, but I think it frees up, a part of your brain that allows you to write. And I would just play and play, or I'd have my looping machine on, or yeah, that sort of mindless guitar playing is what I also love to do. And I get a lot of song like ideas just jamming and not sitting down and saying I'm gonna write at 11 a.m. this Thursday with so and so. Um but yeah, I write all the time. I was baking my mom a cake and I was writing, or watching TV and yeah, it's everywhere. It's kind of amazing how the brain works.
But what is it about driving though? Is it because I could see it if you're driving to a place where you've been before and your brain doesn't have to think about where you're going. But what is it about driving? And I don't know the answer to this, but well, I guess I do. I feel like we've kind of explained it, but what is it? It sounds to me like driving is a place for you that it's almost like it's going to happen if you're on the road.
I think it's looking at all the houses. Like
Really?
yeah, for me, like I love going around and looking at old houses and um seeing, where I used to play music, or I had my first show here. Like, I think it gives me a lot of inspiration because I think it gives me a lot to hope for. Like, um, I don't know. Like, my goal is to have a house someday for my mom and I. And so I think driving around and looking at all these places, it gives me, something to hope for and to dream about. And um, I think scenery, like, um, I took a painting class on landscapes, and I think scenery, it just having wide open spaces, it allows your brain to fill them with ideas. And so I think just, when you're driving and you're looking at the sunset, it's sort of like an endless landscape, and I think it allows you to dream. It's all about getting in that place.
So this is not the answer I was expecting because it's typically people, I love that, but people typically get those ideas again when we're in almost that highway hypnosis, what you were saying, when you're driving and you don't even realize that you're driving. What you're telling me, I think, is that you're actually observant of the things around you when you're driving, and that actually is what gives you ideas.
Yeah. Like people walking or you know, the dogs or that kind of stuff. Yeah. And also like listening to music. I listened to a lot of like everything that sounded like California growing up was like my thing, like Tom Petty, Fleetwood Mac, like that was my jam. And a lot of that goes great with driving. And so I do just try to write things that you want to listen, in the car while you're driving. Yeah.
So that's a deliberate act for you. In other words, it's I'm going to go for a drive and see if I can get ideas.
Hmm. Yeah. But it's both. It's definitely I can get ideas when I'm not thinking about it and when I am.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a very specific question that I ask people who write on guitars because I love the answers to these. So I hear people say that when they're writing music and they are writing with their guitar, they're either sitting down or they're standing up or they're walking around. So have you ever thought about that? Like, do you tend to get ideas when you're playing it? If you're playing guitar and you're thinking of ideas, are you sitting down or are you walking around?
I'm always sitting. Yeah. Either like on the floor or on my bed. Like I'm pretty much home and yeah, I'm always sitting. I'd rather sit on the floor than in a chair or a couch.
Okay, so why is that? Again, I've heard that before. What is, and I, oh God, I wish I could think about the songwriters. We've tried to explore this, whether it's a deep psychological reason, but why the floor? Why not a chair?
I don't know. Some of the people, because I've talked about this with my friends too, and some of the people, are like, well, it's, the earth and you're grounded and, all this stuff but I don't know what it is. I mean, realistically, it could be like all my guitar pedals are on the floor, and so I want to be close to them. Like maybe it's nothing to do with energy at all. But even when I'm other places, I would rather sit. I don't know. I have no clue what it is. Well,
The closest I interviewed Britt Daniel from the band Spoon, and he told me that he still writes on the floor. And his reason was very simple. When he started writing music, he had no money and he couldn't afford a couch. And so he could only write on the floor. And he can now clearly afford a couch, but he still has to write on the floor because it's more comfortable to him. So do you have, and I guess the lead into that is the ritual. I mean, I absolutely have rituals as a writer. I never write and revise in the same chair. Normally not the same room. I'm much more of a morning person. There's certain things I like to have with me when I write. How important is that to you? Well, I guess start with this. Is there a time of day when you're most effective?
normally, like it's gonna sound bad, but 6 p.m. to like 2 in the morning is when my mind is really going. I could I think it's because I know everyone's off work and I'm not gonna get emails, and I know everyone is like done for the day, and so some reason in my mind that's like, okay, you're allowed to think now and you're allowed to, there's no compromising now. You can go and you can write and dream and think about things. And knowing everyone's asleep and knowing the rest of the world is asleep for some reason helps me get to the place where my thoughts can like live freely, even though nobody's hearing them because I'm, here at the house by myself. But I don't know what that is. But yeah, I'm a night owl. I like staying up.
And you realize that about yourself, like you know that about yourself, and you feel like, okay, I'm just not effective in the morning.
Yeah. I try to get everything I have to get done during the day. Like if I have a session I have to be at or certain things to do with social media, all of that stuff, I try to get it done. And then at night is like my time. I can work on, you know, it sounds bad, but the things I maybe love to do at night. Um And yeah, that's what I love. But I think I'd be like that anyway, even if I didn't have stuff to do during the day. I think I've always been like that. I like staying up. And once I get on, one of the DSPs and I start listening to like music recommendations, I'll be up forever, just scrolling through and listening and finding new musicians and artists. And that's like a creative time for me.
Do you ever mishear lyrics from other artists and that gives you inspiration? I hear that a lot.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I heard a Prince one. I guess it was in Little Red Corvette, and it said, um, "I guess I should have known by the way you parked your car sideways that it wouldn't last." And I thought he said, "I guess I should have known that the way you popped your collar sideways that it wouldn't last." I don't know if I can use that one, but I thought that was so interesting. I was like,
I
"It's
love that.
car?" Yeah, I never knew it was parked your car. I thought it was popped your collar, like your collar on your shirt.
Yeah, I hear that a lot that songwriters that when they mishear lyrics, that gives them ideas for songs.
Yeah.
What song? I want to go back to the album. Um, and I've got some quotes up here by writers. I think I mentioned this, and here's one of them. Okay, the poet Rilke said, "Surely all art is the result of one's having been in danger, of having gone through an experience all the way to the end where no one can go any further." But I love that idea that all art is the result of having been in danger. So, how many of the songs, or are there songs on the album where you had the urge to write it, where it was, I need to write this. This is something that it was almost like it was not, oh, I'm messing around and this came up. It was, there was an urge to write.
Yeah, I'm just looking through. I think Central Park. There's a song on the album called Central Park.
Yeah.
That was the one that I was super anxious in my life, and I was ready for change. And I just signed my record deal over COVID, and so I was so excited. But I was like in this same room, and I was raring to go. And I'm like, I want to go to New York, and I want to do things with my life. And that a lot of my songs come from being super restless and anxious and yeah, that was one. And a lot of these though, like Cadillac was one too, a song called Cadillac on the
Yeah.
record that I was I was definitely trying to prove my worth and show everyone that yes, I can do this. And that was one. But a lot of them, I think it's a yes, but it's subconscious sometimes. Like a lot of my writing, I write subconsciously, and I don't know how to explain it. It's like I know what I'm feeling, and I realize it, but I think I just sit down and it comes out. There's no really way to explain it.
Do
Um,
you revise your lyrics a lot?
yeah, I'll go back through and I'll look at them. But I try not to change them too much. But yeah, I should probably edit more than I do.
What are you revising for? Are you revising for sounds or for getting rid of words that just don't do much to the song? What are you revising for?
Yeah, sure. To make every line mean something. Um, and like I said, I'm very. I always, everyone's always like, Cecilia, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm like, how could I know what I'm talking about? Like I'm a 23-year-old girl trying to figure out my life. Of course, the lines are going to come out as, like I don't know what I'm doing because I don't. How could I make it make sense if I don't know what makes sense right now in my life anyways. But that's what it is I try to rewrite to like help get a better understanding because I know what it means, but Joe down the street doesn't.
So the songs that are difficult, are you more likely to give up on them or to see them through because you're stubborn? Or if
uh,
you're stubborn, I should say.
um I try not to give up on them, uh but I don't know. I think if I keep thinking about them and I keep, they're always in the back of my head. Those are the ones that I feel are I deeply resonate with. And so I try to work on those. And sometimes, songs will come out in 30 minutes and sometimes you got to let them, marinate. And, but lucky enough, the ones I think about the most are the ones that I haven't really had to chase. They've just kind of been there and it's like they've always been there. And those are the ones where it's like, oh, finally.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, Ben at songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.